All right. What's up, everybody? It's time for some Real Crusades history. And to kick us off here, can everybody hear that?
Yep.
Yeah, faintly.
We're getting in the mood here with some Crusades music. Welcome to the Real Crusades History live stream. Here, let me go to the chat here and see if everybody can hear us. So this is going to be just kind of a casual live stream. Now, let me see if everybody can hear the music. Can everyone hear the music? If somebody says yes, then okay. Okay. And we fade out our intro music. All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to yet another Real Crusades History live stream. I am J. Stephen Roberts, and I founded Real Crusades History about 10 years ago or so now, which seems weird to think about. Okay, I'm also here with, it looks like Scott Amos is with us now. Scott, welcome, my friend. Are you there, Scott? Okay, sorry. Rand, are you there?
I'm here.
All right, Rand is there. And Peter, are you there?
I'm here.
All right, and let's see if Scott is going to answer now. Mr. Scott Amos, are you there? Oh, wow, Scott is really, really faint, isn't he? Well, we'll see if we can get that corrected. But yes, Scott, you're quite faint, my friend. I don't know, maybe everybody else is hearing the same thing, but in fact, let's ask the people in chat. Can everybody in chat hear everybody? Can everybody on the chat hear what we're saying? Okay, people are saying they can. I'm going to assume they can. Well, this is going to be just kind of a casual Real Crusade. Somebody said Scott is dead. No, we don't want that. Scott, are you there? Oh man, can you guys hear him? He's like really faint.
I can hear anything.
I can just barely hear him.
Yeah, I don't know. Jay Williams says Scott is busy taking the Holy Land, and I think that's probably true. Scott is way ahead of us. I mean, if anybody can do it, it's Edward the First of England anyway. Edward Longshanks.
The long-awaited 10th Crusade.
Yeah. Speaking of which, guys, how come the Ninth Crusade wasn't more successful? How come we couldn't have actually gotten Jerusalem during that one?
That was just a case of not enough and too late.
Yeah.
So not enough resources, not enough men, not enough will really on the part of most Western European realms at that time. Everybody, it was definitely the sunset of the crusading phenomenon. It was.
Yeah.
There definitely was not. You didn't have the enthusiasm.
Did you guys notice on Facebook, Professor Paul Crawford actually disputed the even numbering that one as the Ninth Crusade? I remember we were talking about that one day on Facebook, and Dr. Crawford was saying, "What are you guys talking about? The Ninth Crusade? What the heck was that? There's no Ninth Crusade." And we were like, "Yeah, Dr. Crawford, that's the one where Edward Longshanks, after the Eighth Crusade ended, Edward went on to Acre and fought Baybars a little bit."
Well, we think about, Paul. Can you all hear me now?
Oh, Scott.
Hey.
Yeah. What's up, Scott?
I'm here. Okay, I'm back. I've
Excellent.
Transported back from
The Holy Land?
Yeah, Baybars scared me off, so I'm back. I had to get the hell out. Anyway,
Baybars
I'm just saying Paul, got his education in the 80s and well, through the 80s, I guess, and 70s and 80s actually, and I think the idea that maybe the Ninth Crusade being separate is a little bit later.
Yeah, well, I got to be honest. The funny thing about that whole thing is when Paul said that, I started thumbing through a bunch of books, and I realized that none of the books I owned say anything about that being the Ninth Crusade.
Yeah.
I've seen it. I've seen it in print.
It's on Wikipedia. I think the funny thing is, I think that's where I got it originally. Like, I hate to even admit this, but back when I first got interested in the Crusades years and years ago, of course, one of the first things I did was look them up on Wikipedia, and I remember kind of being like, oh, First Crusade, Second Crusade, just kind of looking through them, and I think and there's always been for years there's been a Wikipedia article specifying Edward's Crusade as the Ninth Crusade. And
Wait, so was the Ninth Crusade
too? I don't know. Yeah, I just don't remember. I remember reading it a couple of places, and it was called. And it seems convenient, so
that's the only reason I use it. Is just because it's convenient. Because rather than saying, that crusade where Edward went and fought Baybars, you can just say.
Well, I guess you really could count that as because Louis' crusade ended on his death, and Edward really went back with his own men, and
yeah.
I would say there's plenty of argument for both because in a lot of ways it did turn into a very separate effort with a very separate set of objectives and agenda than Louis' Crusade. However, Edward was, at the time, Prince Edward was the only reason he was even involved in the Crusade was because he joined Louis' Eighth Crusade.
Mm-hmm.
To continue on, and it it only that only fell apart with Louis' very untimely death in Tunis. So there's historians often, especially academics, they make their living off of arguing over semantics, and you see that with a lot of things. You see that with these sort of arbitrary naming conventions that we come up with for historical events that, with hindsight, don't really fit, or at least they don't fit very neatly, because you have other crusades that honestly should be considered crusades that aren't even counted amongst the numbered. Crusades.
You know what I kind of think? I kind of think the Fourth Crusade should not be in there, and the Barons' Crusade should be one of the numbered ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's what I think.
So you've got the Alexandrine Crusade in the early 14th century. You have you've got the Nicotian Crusade, and stuff. So and those aren't even counted for some reason as numbered crusades. So but they very much were.
Probably because the numbering system is kind of stupid.
Well, didn't it come about into the 19th century and early 20th? Is that
probably? I think it was some group of German scholars, wasn't it? Like I don't remember exactly.
I think so.
But it was
one of the
quick
early
question. So wait, was the so-called Ninth Crusade, was that not even sanctified by the church? Did the Pope not?
No, it was.
No, it was definitely, yeah. Well, definitely. Edward had crusade bulls, or I guess crusade bull from the Pope. Yeah,
right, that's what I thought. So why wouldn't it be considered crusade then?
Well, I think the question is, should it be considered separate from the Eighth Crusade? Because the truth is, those guys all pretty much took the cross kind of under that same campaign, because kind of the way these crusades worked is the Pope would issue a certain bull and then people would take the cross, and the bull under which Edward took the cross was the same one under which Louis took the cross during the Eighth Crusade.
And so I think Louis' brother dropped out.
Charles of Anjou.
Well, what happened was after Louis died, Charles of Anjou kind of came up with this quick treaty with the Emir of Tunis, which actually was pretty much amounted to the Emir of Tunis forking over a bunch of cash, and then he kind of just like pulled the whole thing out at that point.
Well, he lost ships though when they returned from
True. Yeah. He lost a
From
bunch of.
Tunis to Sicily, he lost. There was a big storm, and he lost most of his ships, and really just decided to stay behind. And Edward waited out the season and continued on.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, here we all are, guys. We're here for our live stream, and the thing we were going to talk about tonight, I guess, is our favorite events from the Crusades. I mean, I just kind of came up with that, but have you guys thought of anything that you want to bring up in particular?
No.
Do we only have to choose one?
No, I mean, that's the point. We can talk about this all night. And a couple of people asked some questions when I put up the video announcing this earlier, so we might get to those at some point. And then somebody just asked up there, was the Reconquista Crusade? And the answer, of course, to that is yes, after the First Crusade. So, but yeah, after the First Crusade, the Pope started issuing indulgences for the campaigns in Spain against the Moors, and at that point, the Reconquista becomes part of the Crusades. But so anyway, so yeah, favorite events, favorite people, just favorite stuff in general. Do you guys want to? Who wants to go first on that?
Oh gosh, you're the founder. I think you should probably go. You know what were the crusading? You know what was it about the Crusades that even inspired you to make this group and bring us all bring this group of misfits together and make this happen?
I got very quickly drawn into the Crusades. Like it was when I read that William Thomas Walsh book about Isabella of Spain. Like I was probably like, I don't know, 18 years old or something. I read that and it just completely fascinated me. And there's parts in that where he talks about how Queen Isabel was taking up the sort of picking up the torch for Godfrey of Bouillon and those guys. And I remember being intrigued by that and intrigued by the whole, very early on, the whole idea of the Crusades being this bigger thing that involves Spain and the Holy Land kind of fascinated me. But I don't know. Yeah, the whole for one thing, I think one thing that drew me in about it was, the Crusades are this bigger, way more idealistic and sort of spiritually driven thing than a typical war. And it's sort of this, it transcends so much of the petty politics of various eras. And it's kind of fascinating how it's this shared mantle that, yeah, we can look at Godfrey of Bouillon, we can look at Richard the Lionheart, we can look at Louis IX, we can look at, Fernando III of Castile, Isabel and Fernando much later. These people were all carrying that torch. So it's kind of this long-running sacred, war for European Christendom. I don't know. It's just everything I'm saying right there is kind of the stuff that really got me fascinated by it in the first place. So, what about the rest of you guys? Actually, that's a really interesting question. Like, because everybody here has a very big interest in the Crusades, and I know that's what kind of brought us all together. Like, you and I met when we were both doing undergrad.
When we were both young idealistic college students.
Yeah, we were, but we were both going to other schools, but we had kind of some friends in common, and we both were really into the Crusades. So let's go through each of us and talk about that. Okay, so Rand, let's go with you next. Like, what is it that got you interested in the Crusades?
I think mine's, a lot of my reasons were very similar to yours in that, it really was this, when you look at just the Crusades as a whole, yes, they weren't perfect. It was a very human phenomenon that, and therefore a very imperfect phenomenon. But there really was kind of a nobility and in some ways even a purity to it that you really don't find in much else in terms of human history. Like you don't. It was such an unusual phenomenon that brought together, like you said, Stephen, so many different people from so many different ethnic backgrounds and physical regions and cultures and languages, and it really was kind of this. It really was an ideal that only Christendom could bring about.
Yeah.
And it was motivated by it was a very earthly undertaking. It was a very difficult undertaking. It was harsh. It was brutal. The things that the people who undertook them the things that they would suffer were almost unimaginable even in their day. And they did it willingly. They took that on willingly for this cause of that really was so much more noble than what most people went to war for back then and today. It wasn't about land. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't about any of that. It was about in a sense, it was about protecting your fellow Christians that you knew were suffering in the East, and rescuing the homeland of a God man who 1,000 years prior had walked amongst us. It was it really is this very, and I think it's one reason why the Crusades still to this day, even after the rise of secular modernity and things like that, why it still sort of captures so many people's imaginations. Just the idea of it, the romanticism of it, the chivalry of it, the nobility of it. It really is a very, in that sense. I mean, you look at all across, not just Western history, but you look across other cultures' histories, and you really don't find an equivalent. I mean, there might be a few that maybe come close, but not really. You just don't find something like that. And I made the argument one time with somebody someone that I was discussing the Crusades with, and this person came from the typical modern secular Western background, about the Crusades, and they were real curious to find out, that I felt so positively about the Crusades overall historically. And they asked me why, and I said, really, because I feel like, at least in its early stages, in the early stages of the crusading era, especially like in the First Crusade and shortly afterwards, I really felt like it was sort of a moral golden age of the West. It was, you would never really see anything like that again, and it would always be some part of Western civilization, even long after we've abandoned, the sort of culture that allowed the Crusades to even happen in the first place. After we've long since left it behind, we will still. There's always a part of us that's still reaching back for that, and it's still we're still looking for that chance to have that sort of selfless nobility, even with even that that even involves something as brutal and as harsh as warfare.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the things that's always fascinated me, is the fact that it is this combination of this incredible brutality, but also this most sensitive and intimate sort of spirituality, this connection to Jesus, and this devotion to Jesus it's a personal type of spirituality. I think Christianity has it's a lot more of a personal spirituality than Islam, for example. Islam is all about God as being unreachable. But anyway, not to derail us on that, because I do want to get Scott and Peter's answer on this too. So Scott, I met you after I met Rand. Rand and I had been talking about the Crusades after that. And then, Scott, you and I actually met through Real Crusades History.
Yeah, I came on. This has been just about exactly 4 years ago, Stephen.
Yeah.
You had the page. And
it was a lot smaller back then, too.
Oh, you had 1,700 likes at that time. this was in fall of 2013, about this time, and but I was just looking for crusades, and I was working on my books by then, and I was just looking to connect with some people who are interested online, and I came across your page, and I remember putting in, "Hey man, you've got a great page here," and then you responded, and we just started chatting online. I mean, just exchanging comments on RCH, and it turned out that I told you about, I was writing a book about a series of books about the First Crusade, and you were interested, and it's just here we are now. That's where it all started. And
Yeah,
then the next, early the next year, you invited me to come in and help you with it, and which I was extremely grateful for, and we've been just going ever since.
Yeah, and so what was it, Scott, that kind of got you interested in the Crusades in the first place?
Well, I have to really go a long way. I've thought about that a lot for myself. In high school and college, I just don't remember the Crusade. You're talking the 60s and late 60s and early 70s.
So was that when you were getting interested in it?
No, I'm saying that back then in my high school, really it just went over my head, and I was really interested in the Protestant Reformation is what caught my interest in high school, and then in college I just don't even remember. I took the standard history courses, and then when in architecture school, we talked about Crusader architecture was part of the that was maybe one lecture was devoted to it, but it really wasn't until around 1989. And I went to the library. Gail and I went to we used to go to the library every Saturday, and I picked up a book by a now largely forgotten historian and novelist named Zoe Oldenburg. And
okay, so that's the first book for you?
Yes, I picked up a novel of hers called Heirs of the Kingdom.
Yeah.
Which was written from the point of view of the poor class, the peasants who went on the crusade, and it just blew my mind.
I've read that book, and it's really I think it's maybe a little bit extreme, but yeah, it's a powerful book. So
it's extremely powerful.
I can see how that drew you in.
Oh, it did. And so then I went back to the library. I read that, and then I picked up her history of the Crusades called she was working about the same time Runciman was. She was a contemporary of his, and she was well known as a novelist at the time, especially in France. And then her books were translated into English, and so I read her history of the Crusades, which I need to go back and reread because I want to write a review on it, eventually for the page. But that drew me in. Then for the next, over the next.
Why the Crusades? Like, what do you think it was?
The same reason you guys.
Okay, yeah.
All
that same stuff.
You all just reflected my own thoughts. Just the whole spiritual thing about it. This just the intensity of it, and that remains my prime interest is really what made them tick, what made them go, and what they were feeling, what were their what were their impulses, what was the whole environment. But to go back to my own story, it was, then after that, for the next, 25 years, I picked up, whenever something came along about the Crusades, I'd pick, a new book or something like that. I'd pick it up and read, but I didn't, I wasn't particularly disciplined about it. I just read novels and stuff like that. Anything about it was interesting to me, but I didn't have a disciplined interest until, around, let's see, I retired in 2004, and I thought about, I was interested in the Crusades, and I was thinking, what am I going to do now? And I thought, and so the first thing went through my mind, well, maybe I ought to see about going back to school. And this was, of course, before the proliferation of online education we have now. SMU here in Dallas had a program in an MA in medieval history, or medieval studies, but it would cost me 60 grand. So I wasn't really that kind of kill that right there. So I just kept, just reading and stuff. And then I went to see Kingdom of Heaven.
Yeah, I remember when Kingdom of Heaven came out.
Well, that kind of, all of a sudden, I know the movie was, is full of historical flaws and everything, but it kicked in something in my head and spirit, and I knew enough, to recognize a lot of, what are these, Knights Templar doing? What are these married guys, wearing Templar costumes? A lot of the stuff that was discussed on you and Helena and Andrew Latham, and I picked up on a lot of the kind of things that were weird about it, but it was real. But there was just something about it that just drew me in. And after that, I started reading a lot more, and then I decided, well, I'm going to write a short story set in the Middle Ages. And I started, and it turned quickly into something about the First Crusade, and I started going on that, and then see, that was around that was 2008 when I started writing, and then you and I.
Yeah,
it was several years late. Yeah, 14 was or late 30. So it was about 5 years. Yeah. And I'd been working off and on and reading a lot more. When you and I got to know each other, and and I'd done a lot of I knew a lot more by then, but still kind of in a scattered way, and then. But really, what fascinates me about it is pretty much the same of what you and Rand said.
Yeah, I think
the same aspects.
I almost wonder if, it's like, okay, somebody in the chat just brought up the Knights Templar. Like, I remember, as a kid, like being really fascinated by the Jedi and Star Wars, like that.
Oh yeah,
like that. I just thought that was so cool, and
I thought it was cool too.
And I remember when I as an adult, or a very young adult, I started reading about the Crusades. I remember thinking, okay, so this is like the Jedi in real life, the Knights Templar.
I didn't make that connection until recently. There was an Acton Institute article about that somebody posted in the group about like a year ago, and then as I thought about it, I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Okay, so Peter, now same question to you, like, because you came around to us, you met us all on the page. So how did you get interested in the Crusades?
Well, yeah, so going way back into my much shorter life compared to you guys, that not a hit on your age or anything, but just got to go back to, I think, as a young lad, I, like most young boys, are interested in, the typical action-oriented stuff, cowboys, military guys, and knights, of course. So I was always, I loved the medieval era. I loved the idea of knights. I used to, play with toy knights and look at books about castles before I could even read. And I think I had known about the Crusades vaguely, just through like hearing about it, maybe people discussing it at school or discussing it in the news. Don't really remember exactly when the first time I ever heard the word crusade was, but the first time I really had a grasp of what the Crusades were was when I saw Kingdom of Heaven on TV at my friend's house, and I thought it was a really cool movie. Just like the action, the cinematography, and the era it was in. I knew nothing about the Crusades at that point. And then for a long time, I didn't really look into the Crusades at all. Didn't hear anything about it until I played the second Assassin's Creed game. I don't know. I can't say that word. Assassin's Creed game. And unlike most people who learned a lot about the Crusades through the first one, obviously I know they're not the most accurate games. It was actually the second game, and which takes place in Renaissance Italy. And what really fascinated me about that was the appearance of the Knights Templar, or the Templar Order, and they were sort of portrayed, as you know, as sort of this shadowy, insidious organization bent on taking over the world. Or for some reason, I was really fascinated about them because I remember seeing them in the Kingdom of Heaven movie, and so I bought a book by a guy named Sean Martin about them. It's called The Knights Templar, a very good book. And then I learned about how Knights Templar were not at all these insidious, horrible people that were trying to take over the world through some grand conspiracy. And that also told me about, how the Templars were really just these devoted monks who were committed to protecting the pilgrims on the way to the Holy Land. And as I read deeper into the Crusades, I discovered it was not this offensive, it's unprovoked offensive led against peaceful Muslims by barbarous, bigoted lunatics. It was this defensive war. And I think about like 2 years ago or so, I discovered your channel. And I was on and off studying, the Crusades. Sort of, I had heard more about that through Robert Spencer, who's obviously more of a political commentator, but nonetheless, he does know what he's talking about when it comes to the Crusades. And then I came across your videos, and that further solidified, the knowledge that I had that this was a defensive war. And besides just like helping me learn more about the Crusades and knowing the truth about it, it also helped me in debates with people to debunk a lot of the myths that we have about the Crusades here in the modern era. And so with that, I think I just delved deeper into the rabbit hole of the Crusades history that you guys were presenting, and I was just really fascinated by the whole thing, not just for the sake of correcting the nonsense narrative that we have today, but really just how fascinating the history and lore of the era of the Crusades is. It's like the real life Game of Thrones, basically. Where you have all this political intrigue, you have these epic, massive battles, you have these incredible characters, incredible figures at the time, and I was just really blown away by it. It's really just a fascinating topic. So that's
and I think
sure.
I think that the Crusades are so much more interesting than all these different fantasy stories, and it drives me nuts the way people are so into stupid stuff like Game of Thrones when it's just But anyway, so one thing you guys are all kind of touching on that rang true with me is how people really get interested when you bring up the Crusades. Like, I can think of so many times in my life when just ordinary things were going on, and somehow the Crusades came up, and I started talking about it, and people around me just got totally fascinated by it. Like, I don't know, like I remember once being at a restaurant with some friends, and somehow the Crusades came up. And so, of course, I, launched into my monologue, and all these people at other tables were like turning around, looking at, because it's like, you say stuff like, oh no, the Crusades weren't hostile, or they weren't initiated by the Christians. They were initiated by Islamic invasions, and it was actually a defensive reaction. You start saying stuff like that, and people kind of start turning around, looking at you. And or you say stuff like, "Oh no, the Crusades weren't about greed or power or anything like that. They really were about these spiritual motivations, and that gets people's attention."
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've had the moment. I haven't encountered people who get too defensive, because I think the way I present it becomes very clear to whoever I'm talking about that I know a lot more about it than they do. But I do oftentimes encounter there's like this weird, like, people get like really nervous, and they're like looking over their shoulders.
Yeah.
Like, oh God, don't say that too loudly. Like, the thought police will get you.
I know exactly what you mean, Rand, because how I actually got started with you guys, got and developed my relationship with you guys, was when I gave a speech about a year ago to one of my communications classes in high school, and I decided to give it about the truth about the Crusades, and a lot of my knowledge was gained through your videos and the sources that you provided through your videos, like the late great Jonathan Riley Smith and Thomas Madden and Christopher Tyerman, and I was really surprised when I gave the speech that everybody was, for the most part, from what I could see, that most people in the class were pretty well receiving of the speech. I think there was probably a degree of nervousness when I was giving it, because as I would make eye contact with people, they would kind of look, like, as you were saying, Rand, sort of like nervous, looking over their shoulder and everything. But sort of like you, Rand, also, like I was able to back up what I was saying, because I had done a good amount of research on the topic. But I think, certain people, I think if you present, your case, and you make it clear that this is grounded in solid research, then I think people are more or less convinced of your position.
Yeah, I'll never forget, back when I used to work in the OR, it's really crazy, when you're in the midst of surgery, and like there's, these conversations come up. There's like, somebody laying on the table who's being operated on. But I'll never forget, I was in.
So are you trying to tell us what's really going on while we're under anesthesia?
Yeah, exactly. Fortunately, I don't work anywhere near that stuff anymore. But I'll never forget, like, being in a surgery once, and the doctor's operating and stuff, and there's an X-ray guy standing in the corner, and somehow he started talking about the Crusades, and he started talking about, well, everybody's always talking about Muslim terrorists, but nobody talks about how Christians used to be the terrorists back during the Crusades.
Oh yeah, there we go. Very original, buddy.
So I kind of give him the Clint Eastwood look, and I was like, "Are you sure about that?" He's like, "Yeah, absolutely. Back in the Middle Ages." And I was like, "So, which Crusades exactly are you talking about?" And he goes, "Well, all of them." And of course, I launched into my correction, and I'll just never forget the look on the guy's face. It's like, I started talking about the Seljuk Turks and stuff, and the Alexius Comnenus and Pope Urban II. Of course, people don't know anything about that, but I kind of feel like when I look back on that particular instance, I feel like I maybe sort of overloaded the guy with information, but I'll never forget, because everybody in the room was like looking at me all of a sudden, including the doctor. So like people find the Crusades so fascinating. It's like you said, Rand, when people feel like they're around somebody who actually knows what they're talking about with the Crusades, it does really, they're kind of like, whoa, really? You actually know about this? It's just something a lot of people don't know.
I think it just proves just how baseless the secular modern or postmodern really attitude is towards the way that secular modernity thinks about the Crusades. It's not grounded in any fact, like, at all. And once you, it really doesn't take a whole lot to expose that. And I think that's what, I think it really takes a lot of people back. I think they kind of, they kind of get to see something that they've been told, only one thing about, or they've only heard about it in one context, and all of a sudden it's like they're getting to see this from like a totally different angle, and it looks totally different. It's to them, and I think it really does just kind of it kind of takes people back a little bit. I think it surprises them, and they. Nobody wants to think of themselves as ignorant or misinformed or things like that. And I think once you show that the so-called enlightened attitude towards the Crusades is really just shockingly ignorant, people naturally, I think, sort of want to lean into, well, so what is the real story? What were the Crusades really about? What were they really like? And I think that's one thing you can chalk up to even just the success of this group. I mean, I think we're at a place, Stephen. I think you would even admit that back when we first were messing about with this, I don't think we ever thought it was going to become as big and develop the sort of following that it did. But I think it's just because there's that visceral interest in the real story. What were these things really all about?
Yeah, I mean, when I uploaded a few videos, back in 2008, and when I did that, I mean, I just thought I was going to upload a few videos and that'd be it. I mean, I didn't even think there would be that much interest, but I remember, like I come back later and there's like thousands of views on it and all these comments, but yeah, so cool. So we've kind of, hit some interesting discussion points. So does anybody want to talk about some particular events or people from the Crusades? That I'll go ahead and start with one that I've been thinking about lately. I've been reading once again. I've returned to James I of Aragon's autobiography. I don't know if any of you guys have ever read this, but it's actually the oldest book we have written by a king. So of course, James I of Aragon, he was the king of Aragon for most of the 13th century, and he wrote this story of his life. And so it's really fascinating. I mean,
yeah, it does sound fascinating. Love to read that.
Yeah, it's a long book, but it's a pretty easy read. But so I was just reading a little bit about. I've been rereading it. I got to the part where he has his crusade to capture Valencia, right? Because that's one of his big projects. Is he conquers Valencia, incorporates that into the Kingdom of Aragon. And of course, Valencia was one of these long-standing holdouts for Al-Andalus. It was one of the major cities of Al-Andalus. This was considered, one of the great disasters for Spanish Islam is when Valencia is conquered. But so there's a really great story about the kind of the initial actions of that crusade. Was he takes over this castle called El Puig, which is basically it's a like whenever you're going to conquer a major city, you first pick off some of these strategic castles that sort of border it. So he takes over El Puig and he leaves a garrison there. And basically this garrison is in a pretty difficult situation because they're on the frontier, and his plan is to have them hold this frontier position on this castle over the course of the winter. And so he departs with the main army, and then it's just the garrison there. It's just this group of several hundred knights. And while they're there during the non-campaigning season, right, like the fall and winter, the emir of Valencia actually shows up with his entire army to attack them, and the garrison captain is this knight named Bernat Guillem, Don Bernat Guillem, and he gets all the guys. He says he has them hear mass, and they armor up and they go out, and he says, well, we're going to actually like take on this army. We're not going to like hole up here and be trapped in this castle to be slaughtered like rats. So they go out there, they get their formation going, and they face off with this army. And at first, the Valencian army is able to kind of one up on them, but they rally you know, they rally they come back, right? They cry out to the Blessed Mother. They cry out Santa Maria, Santa Maria, and they end up defeating this much larger army. And this actually ends up being kind of one of the critical moments of the Valencian Crusade, and it wasn't expected to be, because they kill like so many of the Emir of Valencia's men, and yeah, I mean, just like they decimate his army and really reduce his ability to resist James. And so when James comes back the next year for the campaigning season, he's really ready to, you know, put the hurt on Valencia, and he takes over Valencia the next year. But there's a great scene that James talks about, because James just talks about hearing about this. You know, he's not there. He talks about how one of the knights from El Puig shows up in Huesca. He's up at Huesca actually organizing supplies for the campaign next year. And this guy's all battered, and he's got a bandage across his face with some blood from this battle. And he's like, sire, we've defeated the Emir of Valencia for you. And, you know, and immediately James, you know, drops everything, and he has everybody go into the cathedral at Huesca, and the bishop says mass, and they sing the Te Deum Laudamus. So yeah, somebody asked what year this was. This was 1237. But yeah, I just that's just something I've been reading about lately, and it's just I think it's kind of not a really widely known chapter from the Crusades, but it's great. You know, that's a great story.
Any like awesome chronicle like straight from the mouth of like a major historical figure. I think that's awesome. I think that's like a must read for pretty much any student of history to read something like that, because I mean, there's no other way to really get as close as possible to understanding what it was like to live back then than to read a primary source like that, like a primary source autobiography like that. That's something that's I mean, I don't know how else you could get that close to being in that moment in history.
Yeah, and the nice thing about James's book is, of course, he does kind of, you know, present himself in a sort of a really sort of heroic light, but he also kind of like puts his mistakes in there. Like he talks about some military errors he makes when he's pretty young, and he even talks about some times when some of his older nobles, because he became king when he was a very young man, and actually waged his first crusade when he was a very young man, which he was successful at. He conquered the island of Majorca from the Muslims, but he even talks about when some of the older nobles, you know, kind of more experienced guys kind of disrespected him a little bit, and, you know, or maybe like, you know, what are you talking about, kid? You know, he includes that, and so he's not above including that, if you know. And I think that's kind of a characteristic of Western monarchy in general, is Western monarchs tended to be more approachable and relatable with their subjects than we find as you get into the Orient. But
yeah,
anyway, but I get what you're saying, Peter. Yeah, like reading a primary source from an historical author, you know, from these old chronicles and stuff, it's kind of an intimate act. You know, it's like it's one way that you can kind of get close to somebody from history. Like I remember when I read Anna Komnene.
Oh yeah,
like that. Have you ever read that, Peter?
Not yet. It's on my reading list though.
Yeah, you'll like that. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. It's like I'm like getting into the mind of this Byzantine princess from the 11th century. I mean, and you know, she writes all kinds of sort of formal stuff too. But the best stuff I always found in medieval chronicles is when they talk about kind of the more daily life stuff, which she does that at times. And James does that too in his chronicle. You know, there's these moments where they kind of talk about something just from their ordinary life. Like I remember Anna Komnene at one point in her chronicle talks about having a discussion with her mother, who was the empress, about some theological topic, just kind of, you know, talking about some religious issue. And, you know, it's kind of like, you know, you get the and Ginu just said the Alexiad is horribly skewed. Yes, I know that, Ginu. Like,
of course it's going to be skewed. I mean,
it's very. She basically just lionizes her father, but it's still a great book. It's still a great book.
Yeah, and it's a good way to just understand like and you can say this for history in general, but just to understand why certain things are the way they are today, and how they transitioned from point A to point B in history. Understand that.
Yeah,
that's important.
So does anybody else have a particular event or personality they want to talk about right now?
Well, going back to this idea that since we've established that the Crusades were not these just unspeakable acts of evil perpetuated against peaceful Muslims by these barbaric, horrible Europeans. I think one of the stories I read as I delved deeper into my studies of the Crusade that really, show that the opposite is true, that I really liked, was it's a story about King Baldwin I of Jerusalem during the early years of his reign. And this period is really, I think, I'm a big fan of this period of history of the Crusades, because there's a lot of interesting stuff going on during the time when the Crusader kingdoms are first being established, and the relationship with the neighboring Muslim kingdoms, and the wars and the conflicts that they go through with them. But one particular story about Baldwin that I really thought is great, because it disproves that the modernist myth about the Crusades is that there was a point during his reign where he attacks a caravan, and after he's captured the members of this caravan, they've surrendered, he discovers that one of the prisoners is the wife of a very important sheik in the area. And so instead of killing her or raping her, like I think most people who don't know much about the Crusades would expect, he actually cares for her. He provides her with food and water, and since she's pregnant, she provides her with her and the baby milk from a camel, actually, and even let her stay in his personal royal tent in his camp. And because of this, the sheik was so impressed and was so grateful for Baldwin treating his wife this way that he basically swore a sacred oath to Baldwin to repay him. And the sheik actually, I think it was the Second Battle of Raqqa, or the First Battle of Raqqa, I can't remember, but the sheik ultimately ended up saving Baldwin's life by providing him crucial information to allow him to escape from this vast Muslim horde that greatly outnumbered him and his forces.
And this was Baldwin I of Jerusalem?
Mm-hmm.
I think I remember that vaguely, but I feel like I haven't heard about that in a long time. But yeah, that's pretty typical stuff. People do kind of think, oh, well, this was just a time of barbarism, and just you're just gonna kill whoever your captives are. But yeah, and that goes for both sides too. Muslim and Christian soldiers during this period didn't necessarily, just kill somebody out of hand just because. But and part of that too is because a captive is worth more than a dead body in terms of ransom. But so yeah, somebody just asked in the chat if Saladin was an honorable man. I said, yeah, he had his honorable qualities. I think that's a fair thing to say. And Gino, of course, Gino's like really catching my attention in the chat tonight. Gino goes, unless you were Nubian, Ethiopian, or a Templar. Yes.
Or one of his nephews.
Right, or one of his family members.
Yeah. Well, it was Helena during a lot of the podcasts that pointed out that, when it was convenient for him to be charitable, then or when it was convenient for him to be charitable or chivalrous, then he would definitely take that opportunity. But I don't know if he was inherently like chivalrous. Obviously we know about the execution of the Templars and Hospitallers after the Battle of Hattin, and so
yeah, and I think that was a hideously dishonorable thing to do. Sure. But we do have stuff like that from on the Crusader side too. I mean, it did happen, you know. So, but, you know, Saladin was definitely somebody you could deal with, though, and the Christians felt that they could. I mean, you know, Richard could deal with them, obviously. He gave fairly good terms to a lot of castles that surrendered and stuff like that. Who else? You know, like compared to somebody like Baybars, for example. I mean, Baybars you could not deal with. Baybars just he just would massacre everybody.
Yeah, he was the real monster, I think. And as far as Saladin goes, I know he's like spoken about as if he's like this incredible military strategist, and you guys have discussed this in previous podcasts before. But honestly, I mean, not that he wasn't a good general. I definitely think he was a good general, but I definitely think someone who's underrated that I think probably is more deserving of the title of a great strategist would probably be somebody like Nur ad-Din. You know, if you read about his campaigns against Crusaders, I think it seems to me like he has a lot more victories against the Crusaders than Saladin does.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Peter. Nur ad-Din definitely he definitely scored some serious military victories over the Crusaders several times. But it is interesting. A lot of his military victories didn't really result in, you know, much serious territorial loss for the Crusaders. And I don't want to say that too absolutely, because there certainly were some episodes where he did.
Yeah. We know that's where I think Saladin really shines in comparison to Nur ad-Din, because as Helena has stated before on the podcast, you know, Saladin is really was a great politician. You know, a great negotiator.
Yeah.
He knew how to get things done. He knew how to secure important pieces of land, important castles in Levant and Syria, and I think
he knew how to deal with Islamic politics too.
Right. And that cunning, that just pure skill that he had in those areas was, I think, that's the reason he was such a boon to the Crusaders and why he was so successful in securing or in defeating the Crusaders for the Islamic world.
Yeah, you mean he was a boon to the Islamic world? He definitely wasn't a boon to the Crusaders.
Did I say boon? I meant to say
a problem for them.
Yeah, problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Good points. Anybody else have anything to add on any of that?
No, not really. You know, for me, I really can't pick one figure or incident. I mean, the whole thing is fascinating. I think the figures that I'm drawn to the most would be just so many of the military leaders that came out of the Crusades. Really, in my opinion, especially for the Crusader side, were really some of the most underrated and talked about, but some of the most brilliant military commanders that the West ever produced. I mean, people like Richard, people like Prince Edward during the Ninth Crusade, people like you know, Bohemond, you know, Godfrey of Bouillon. I mean, these men were able to accomplish things. Baldwin IV, you know, they were able to accomplish so much with so little, and they really did just stand. They really did just face down, you know, this tide that was constantly threatening to overwhelm them. And it was, you know, and between their tactical skill and their command and control over an extremely dedicated, you know, and many times, you know, more tightly, you know, connected force. They really were able to just achieve what should have been impossible in terms of warfare at that time. So yeah, it really was just incredible what some of those guys were able to pull off.
Who were those guys
militarily?
Who were those guys you pointed out again, Rand?
Just Baldwin and Godfrey of Bouillon from the First Crusade, Baldwin the Fourth, the Leper King. There were others. Both Baldwin the First and Baldwin the Second had some pretty decent military successes. And of course, the one that really stands out is Richard I from the Third Crusade. Just what he was able. I make the argument all the time, and I know many other academics have as well, that Richard really was the premier military commander of his generation. Just what he was able to accomplish militarily with what he had available was on par with Alexander and Edward the Black Prince and Thomas Jackson, and figures of that, Arthur Wellesley, figures of that caliber. He absolutely deserves to be considered, to be one of them, and considered on the same level. So, that's what's always really fascinated me are the military leaders that you saw, and just some of the and even some of the nameless ones. The very potent professionalism you see with like the military orders, with the Knights Templar, the Knights Hospitaller, and the other minor ones. There really was just this crack professionalism amongst them that you really didn't see anywhere else at that time in Europe. In a lot of ways, I've heard some academics almost argue that they were because of their organization, that they were almost sort of proto-modern in a lot of ways. So it's I don't necessarily agree with that, because it's the comparison doesn't really fit, but yeah, it really is just fascinating to see how this one event brings out really just this cream of military capability from Western Europe, on an international scale. And yeah, did you have guys who failed, who were failures? Absolutely. Poor Hugh de Lusignan, of Hattin, the leadership of the Fifth Crusade, and even despite his sainthood and his just unfathomable personal devotion to the crusading ideal, poor Saint Louis IX was not was definitely not a very potent military leader.
Louis.
Unfortunately, but
Louis's crusades are just total disasters. But I will say this about the Fifth Crusade: I don't think the Fifth Crusade is an embarrassing defeat. I think it was a pretty. I mean, it was defeated, yes, but they came pretty close.
They did.
mean, the Fifth.
They did, and in some ways that almost makes it even worse, because it's like it's almost like they were there, they had it, like they were almost there, and then they blew it.
Yeah, that's true.
It was.
I know the Muslims really thought they were about to get their asses handed to them in that one. I mean, they were, and the thing is, the way it ends, of course, is the Christian army is they're kind of at this point where they've got to fight their way out of this impossible situation. And at that point, I think it's Al-Kamil. Or maybe it was Al-Kamil's father. I don't remember. But whoever the Ayyubid Sultan is, he goes, okay, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go if you promise to just leave. And they say, okay.
Exactly.
and then he entertains them all in his tent and feeds them and has a banquet with them. So it's like, Yes, the Fifth Crusade is a defeat, and and like you said, Rand, because of everything that went into it, and because of how close they came, it's rough. But it's not like the Seventh Crusade or the Second Crusade. It's not like
or the Fourth, where they're just completely like incompetent.
Well, the Fourth they did conquer something, but
actually,
but, okay, put it like that. You're right.
I guess what I'm saying is, like the Seventh Crusade, everybody's captured. You know what I mean? The King of France is a prisoner. That's not what happens with the Fifth Crusade. With the Fifth Crusade, Al-Kamil says, look, and Al-Kamil did have them kind of by the balls at that point, right? Yeah. But that was really the first point when they were in a really difficult situation. Up until then, things went pretty well. Like the Siege of Damietta was pretty brilliant. But so Al-Kamil basically says, you know, if you guys will just leave Damietta, if you guys will just leave and we can end this thing, then, you know, you can leave. You know, I'm not going to make anybody pay a ransom or anything. Which, you know, at that point, they were talking about, well, maybe we could just fight our way through this thing. You know, so and Al-Kamil's whole thing was he was just like, I got to get these guys out of here, and part of that was because he was worried about a coup that was brewing with, you know, as always among the Ayyubids. Like his position was unstable. But anyway, that's just don't you guys think that that's kind of like the Fifth Crusade? Yeah, it's a defeat, but it's like, considering what they had to work with and the situation. I mean, conquering Egypt is just like always very, very difficult. And it was they came pretty close. Anyway.
Well, it's to me, the Crusades signify, in a lot of ways, the return of the West to the global stage, in a lot of ways, and not the least of which is militarily. You know, before that, the West was really kind of insular. It was isolated due to the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, and the global order that had been Rome. You know, the Byzantine East had really sort of withdrawn from itself, or within itself, and you know, you saw kind of an eclipse of the West, or what was becoming the West, during the early medieval period, and before, you know, during the aftermath of the fall of the Roman order. And the Crusades really kind of mark, for me, they mark a Western resurgence. They mark a return of the West to as a world player, you know, and they do it so effectively, and they you know, they essentially achieve what should have been the impossible, and they keep it going for almost 200 years, for just shy of 200 years. And in doing so, they reconnect the West to the Orient, and there's all the, you know, there's all this cross-cultural exchange, and you know, it does. It's the West kind of reopened the world, you know, to itself again, and really began. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people miss about the Crusades. You know, they you know, these people who, you know, the postmoderns who, you know, they think, oh, it was just, you know, this exercise of fanaticism and greed and all that kind of thing. It's like, no, it wasn't. It was actually extremely pivotal for the West.
Almost like the West's survival.
Yeah, well, and not so much as survival, but it was it reasserting itself on the world stage. That you know, it wasn't going to be this insular, you know, little corner of the planet. That the West was interested in what in what was going on far beyond it. That it was interested in what was going on in the rest of the world, and you really see that trend continue to even into the modern period, where, you know, the one of the main cultural characteristics of Western civilization is that it's a very outward looking civilization. It's not a hermetic, inward dwelling civilization, like what you find in a lot of like Far Eastern cultures, where it's all, they just kind of wall themselves off, and they hide in their little sort of hermetic bubble, and don't really reach out at all. And the West is the exact opposite. The West reaches out sometimes, sometimes in ways that maybe aren't terribly tasteful from a moral perspective. If you want to, yak on and on about colonialism or whatever. But it's an outward facing civilization, and the Crusades is kind of when you really see that come back as a phenomenon, and it's united, it's driven by the Christian principle of hey, we're going to go out and we're going to rescue these people that need us, or we're going to go out there and we're going to go out there and help someone else.
Yeah, I mean, just real quick, I mean, I would just say I totally agree with what you were saying there, Rand. I mean, like before the Crusades, I mean, Europe is not looking so good. I mean, it's like, after the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe is fraught with disunity. It's impoverished. It's constantly under attack by the Muslims and by the Vikings, and it's almost on the brink of total invasion by the Muslims as the Byzantine Empire is crumbling while they're at war with the Seljuks. And it's this last call to arms, this last call to unity by Pope Urban II that gets the lords of Europe, to get off their asses and really, get out there and fight this threat and to really save Europe, and to, like you were saying, basically rejuvenates the spirit of Europe into a civilization that's able to defend itself, it's able to assert itself, and a civilization that's also worth defending. And I think that's such a important and profound aspect of the history of the Crusades that, like you said, is just so often missed by people. And that's something I think should be stressed about the history of the Crusades.
Well, I think that the Crusades are more a product of the success of the West than like the thing that necessarily kind of brings, because I mean, like you were saying, Peter, yeah, in the early Middle Ages, Europe is in a pretty difficult state, but we kind of have this thing happen in the 11th century where there's just this rise of the West,
right?
And
we've got this whole 700 years of the development of a complete new civilization, which had really reached some pretty high points by the time of the First Crusade.
And that's exactly how I meant that. I meant that as that. You're absolutely right, Stephen. The Crusades was the physical manifestation of the resurgence of the West. It was the sign. It was the sign to the entire world that the West had returned.
Yeah.
And was back, and in many ways was better than it had been before.
Yeah.
Oh,
instead of Roman legions marching about under eagles, conquering everything in sight for the empire, for the glory of Rome, or whatever. Now it was armies marching under a cross to go rescue Christians, in lands where they were needed, and it really was. It was kind of the sign that the whatever had happened in the aftermath of the fall of Rome, much in the spirit of the Christian writers at that time, especially like St. Augustine with the City of God, that it wasn't the end. In fact, it was just the beginning of something even better. And the Crusades was the manifestation of that. It was the West has returned, and it was better than it even had been before.
By the time of the First Crusade, the European civilization was kind of incredibly sophisticated.
Oh, absolutely,
I mean, this whole new culture and had grown up. Had evolved over the period, of like 700 years, and it just kind of burst forth upon the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that we have also, like, before the First Crusade, we have two very important victories over Islam. We've got Spain and we've got Sicily. Like, the Normans conquer Sicily. They conquer this long-term, like 200 years or so. They had this emirate of Sicily, which it's quite a while. And then in Spain, by the time we get to this king, Alfonso VI of Leon, I believe it is, and maybe his father before him. I don't remember who it was, but Alfonso VI of Leon is the most powerful monarch in the Iberian Peninsula, and that's kind of the first time. I believe it was him. Or if it wasn't him, it was his father, but I'm pretty sure it was Alfonso VI. Well, that's the first time the Christians had been in that position in the Iberian Peninsula since the Arab conquest. But what's interesting about that is it's the fighting men. Alfonso VI had the best warriors. The Arabs had gotten kind of decadent, and like their frilly, luxurious cities like Cordoba and Valencia and Sevilla and stuff had, they had the wealthier cities, the wealthier parts of Spain, undoubtedly, like by far, in fact, as we get into the late 11th century. But Alfonso VI, he's got the best army. He's the one who all these rich Muslim cities are now paying tribute to, and he can kind of make or break these different Muslim rulers. So that is a sign of what's going on in the West in general. That's why all of a sudden, the Sicilian Muslims can't stop their territory from being taken over, and this is a different beast that the Arab world is suddenly facing than the West that they did face. Although they got a little preview of it with Charles Martel, I guess.
Yeah. I just want to clarify that I didn't mean that the Crusades I don't know what I was saying. That it wasn't until the Crusades that Europe was believed that they were okay. No, basically what I was saying, at least what I meant more or less, was that the Crusades sort of reminded the West that it was a civilization worth defending, in the sense that you have this impending Muslim invasion coming, and you have Pope Urban, who calls for the First Crusade in defense of Europe and to save the Christian brethren suffering in the East. And I think I would assume that a lot of people in the West probably had lost faith in their civilization, or didn't think that it was a civilization that could withstand an invading force such as Islam. So basically what I meant was that, like you were saying, Stephen, it's basically a product of the West. Yeah. I don't know if that made sense or something.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, gents, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to see myself. I'm gonna have to exit stage left here with this. So I've got some places I need to be.
Off to the Templar
tonight,
chapter reading. Are you, Rand?
Yeah. Well, it's the first rule of the Templar Order is you don't talk about the Templar Order. So
right.
Well, Rand, it's great having you. This has been a fun little stream. It's kind of cozy. It's like kind of us all kind of just
it's a fireside chat.
It's a fireside chat. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. So
which we should call this. We should say, like, join us for the next Real Crusades History fireside chat featuring Rand Brown, the always in demand Rand Brown. Captain.
Yeah, we should do this more regularly, definitely. I'm gonna try to prompt us to do it more regularly. So yeah, Rand, take care, man. It's great having
you.
Rand,
thank you, and have a good time without me, and to all our listeners and our followers and noble lords and ladies, Deus Vult.
Deus Vult.
Deus Vult.
Deus Vult. All right, Rand, take it easy.
Later, Rand.
Take care.
Cool. All right, Scott and Peter, what's up, guys?
Well, is there anybody we want to bring in now that Rand has left?
Oh yeah, let's see if anybody wants to come in. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me ask the chat.
Hopefully, Christopher Torres, if you're out there.
Yeah, that's who I was thinking about was Christopher. He was had on a comment on Facebook today. He mentioned he wanted to know when we were going to be on and how if he could come on. So if you're out there, Christopher.
Yeah.
Well, let me message him on Facebook because yeah,
I've been meaning to. We've been talking about just Skyping together because he's like one of our closest fans. He's been around for a while, so yeah, he's a good friend to the team. He's almost like that. The odd man out.
Okay, I'm trying to see if anybody wants to come in. Everybody's so. Come on, guys. One guy goes, "You guys seem like you're enjoying talking amongst yourselves." Like, come on, man. Oh, man. Hold on. Who wants to come in? Okay, all right. Christopher just messaged me. Oh, he says he's trying to. Okay. Here. Okay, let me. I'm going to send Chris the link here. Okay. Wait, where am I? Okay, I'm going to send Chris the link. See if anybody else has said they wants to come in. God. Everybody in the chat's like ducking the invitation.
Well, stage.
This one goes, I wish I actually knew something about the Crusades. You don't have to know anything about the Crusades. We're not gonna quiz you. If you come in, we're gonna ask you
what year was Godfrey of Bouillon born and where?
And nobody even knows the answer to that. But yeah, if somebody wants to come in, I will message you the link. I probably need to be friends with you on Facebook, honestly. Okay, somebody here. I'm gonna give a quest for people. Let's see here. Look up J. Stephen Roberts on Facebook and add me as a friend so I can message you. Okay, now it seems like a bunch of people want to come in, so we probably won't be able to.
I think we could add a couple more.
Let's get a few people in here. And somebody told me that Facebook is evil.
Well, I understand that.
We all know that already.
I think Ginu's going to come in here. Okay. I just sent it to Ginu.
Is Christopher coming in?
I think Christopher's trying to come in.
Chris, what's the problem here?
We'll see. Okay, somebody just added me. Stephen Walsh. Okay. I'll send it to this guy, Stephen Walsh. And now the friend requests are coming in like crazy now. Okay, so I've sent the link to the live stream to several people.
Okay. Well, this is nice. We can do just this on such a relaxed basis.
Yeah, this is the way to do it.
It is. A lot of times on podcast, well, especially when we have.
Oh, Ginu's in here. Ginu's in here.
Oh, Ginu's here. Hey, Ginu.
Ginu the man. Okay, you gotta mute your YouTube video, Ginu.
This is like.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Hey, what's up, Ginu?
Hey, Ginu.
I just realized.
How are you?
This is like the Howard Stern show where he has like the regular callers.
I feel like so Ginu, there's some noise coming from your end. Do you have?
Hello, guys.
You're gonna need to mute your YouTube video.
Now, who we have?
Steven, what's up, man?
Not much. Just enjoying being a rant out.
Okay, so everybody needs to know, mute your. Here, let's see here. I may have to mute Ginu for a minute. Okay, yeah, a lot of noise is coming from Genu. Okay, Genu, I need you to do something for me, brother. I need you to mute your computer sound and put in earbuds or something so I can get you in here. Okay, Steven, what's up, man?
Oh, not much. I've never done anything like this before. Just I'm a history buff who likes saying random jokes in the chat. About it.
So, how did you get interested in the Crusades?
Oh man, I actually started out with English about 10 years ago or so. We had to pick a random topic, and I chose Crusades, generally speaking. And big formative book for me, I haven't heard this mentioned on the podcast, was God the Stallion by Robin Stark. Loved it, actually.
I can't really hear you that well, Steven. Here.
Yeah.
Steven, see if you can get like a headset or something. I'm going to mute you for just a second. I'm going to go back to Genu and see if Genu's... Let's see if we can unmute Genu here. Wait, can I... This is very... Okay. Once I mute people, is that it? I can't unmute him? Oh, man.
No? Let's see. Okay, I'm
trying to unmute Genu here.
Yeah. I don't think he... Well, do I have him? Oh, I have him unmuted. All right, he's unmuted.
Genu, what's up, man?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Good, man. How are you?
Good.
No, you said you're good. So, Genu, do you live in India, or you originally come from India, or something like that?
Yeah, I'm originally Indian, and I still live in India right now.
So, how did you get interested in the Crusades?
Christian action, epic story, all of the above.
And you are a Christian yourself?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Well, man, I feel like we've been talking on Facebook for all this time, so it's nice to finally get to talk to you. So who's your favorite figure from the Crusades? Let's go there.
Oh come on, that's not even a tough one. The Lionheart, obviously.
Right, there you go.
I love this guy even more now. Now hearing him speak, he just seems like the man.
Yeah, you've got a pretty epic voice, Genu. I think we need to like get you to do some voiceovers for us.
Yeah.
Okay, I could try, but
Awesome. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna go back to Steven here and see if we can get him working here.
So, by the way, what about your favorite characters?
For me, I mean, of course, the Lionheart. He's that epic image of Christian chivalric virtue and just his great military commander.
Same would be badassery, yeah.
Exactly. Same could be said for Baldwin the First, Godfrey Bouillon, Bowman. The whole First Crusade crew is up there. I'd definitely say some of the Templar Grandmasters are also very badass.
Odo of Saint Amand. I think we're gonna have to go with him.
Yeah.
I was thinking about how as impressive as, for example, like Fernando III of Castile and James I of Aragon, like they're kind of the guys who made the really heavy-hitting conquests in the Iberian Peninsula.
Stephen, I always wanted to ask you. You're pretty much high up on the Iberian Crusades. What do you think about the Basque contribution to the Crusades?
I don't know much about it, honestly. I mean, that was just kind of like a small region that sort of was
Navarra, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just wasn't. I don't think the Basque region doesn't fit really enormously into the Crusade. I mean, there were knights from that region who were involved, but
yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about the connection to the Lionheart. He married into the region, so I was just thinking.
Okay, Richard. Oh yeah, Richard's marriage into the region. Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to mute Genu again here, man. I think we're getting some whistling.
I'm hearing a lot of squealing and.
Yeah. Well, okay. I'll answer
you.
you.
Start squealing.
Not you, Genu. Just.
I think it's
just background noise. Don't take it that way.
It's like
got a couple of Muslims around here, you know. So
yeah, that's the background.
Well, in case we can't talk to you anymore, Genu, I just want to say thanks for being here, brother.
Oh no problem. My pleasure.
Yeah, man.
Awesome.
We'll have you back on too.
Okay, yeah, that was coming from Genu. Yeah. Okay, so just to answer Genu's question there, yeah, I mean, I think that it's really too bad that Richard's marriage to Berengaila of Navarre couldn't have worked out. Like, imagine if we had an heir come out of that, then God, imagine how different history could have been.
Oh, Richard's death just, you know, well, I mean, I guess we could make up a lot of stories of what could have happened.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that we could have had a situation where England and France were, just very different geographically than what ended up happening. Okay, so I'm gonna have to have Scott and Peter like do the actual hosting here, because I'm like doing all this technical stuff. I'm like adding people on Facebook and inviting them into the chat.
Mm-hmm. Peter,
mm-hmm.
You guys were talking about in your interactions with people at work, school, and everything about how people react to the Crusades. I mean, I'm retired and really am not in the working world or the academic world. Those are things that are long ago for me, and a lot of times, but I encounter indifference.
Mm-hmm.
People,
whoa, the whistling sounds back. Oh man.
I mean, I just wondered if you had any experience in that regard, or people do you find anybody that's just just totally indifferent to what your interests or?
I mean, so when I first gave that speech to my class, and that was it's a group of high school kids. I was a senior in high school at the time when I gave it. So a group of high school kids, I think, from all classes. I think a lot of them, if I had to guess, just judging by those who spoke, those who, commended me for the speech, and just by examining sort of their facial expressions, I think a lot of them were interested and intrigued by what I had to say. I mean, I don't know if some of them, secretly did not like what I had to say. They probably were like, oh, this is just a bunch of racist right-wing crap or something like that. But, I mean, I don't know, I would imagine some of them might be indifferent, like, why should I care about this? But the way I did it, I linked it up to modern-day Islamic terror. And, I started out by bringing up, the Paris terror attacks, which had just happened, and San Bernardino. And then I went into, Obama's famous quote where he basically said, well, this isn't exclusive to Islam. Christians did the same thing during the Crusades.
Right.
And
Bill
from that,
Clinton too. Yeah.
Right. And so from that, I jumped into debunking that myth about the Crusades. I sort of started talking more about the Crusades in general. That's pretty much like the only time I've really talked about it towards people. I talked about it with my parents and told them about the information I've learned, and they liked my speech as well, and they sent it to their friends, and they liked it. So I think I would say more people are interested in it and are fascinated by it, just because, like, put aside the political implications of it and just this idea, Christian violence versus Muslim violence, putting all that aside, just looking at the Crusades as a historical era, as a historical event. I think people are really fascinated by that, of, learning about the knights, the kings, the politics of it, the intrigue, the battles, all of that I think is just fascinating in general to people, without even looking at sort of the modern day political implications that we ascribe to it.
Yeah, I guess the reason I ask, because I have lots of friends in different areas, and among them is a group of guys my age here in Dallas who are highly educated and professional type people, and they're just they're indifferent. You know,
Right.
they're just not interested, and you think they would be, or they just give it passing. You know, passing. Oh, well, that's kind of interesting, Scott. You know, let's go on and talk about what the Dallas Cowboys are doing. I mean,
Right.
I mean, really, it's these guys. They want to sit around and talk about football.
Right. Are they
normies?
Yeah.
Okay, so we got
Normies.
we got a couple new people here. So Troy, what's up?
Chris?
Oh, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, how you doing, man?
Oh, I'm fine.
Awesome.
I like the Dragon Ball Z profile picture.
Yeah, that's our Dragon Ball Z guy. And then we got over here Chris, it looks like. Chris, what's up, man? Hello, Chris.
Christopher Torres.
Maybe. I don't know.
Didn't look like him.
So Chris is not answering. Okay, so Troy, how did you get interested in the Crusades?
Well, I mean, I've always been interested in history. I mean, I never studied it in college or anything, but it was always just an interest of mine. I'm reading books about history all the time. So, yeah.
Cool. So what are some of your favorite figures from the Crusades?
I don't know if I have a favorite. I mean, I guess Lionheart was pretty good. Who else would be really?
He's popular tonight.
Yeah, I get. Barbarossa is an interesting character.
Oh yeah,
he's underrated, isn't he? Yeah, like what he didn't really, you know, achieve any conquests on the Third Crusade, but he did kick some serious ass while he was actually in Anatolia. So
yeah,
I mean, he did conquer the capital city of the Sultanate of Rome, didn't he? Just wasn't a permanent conquest. So
yeah, I forget when was it he died. I know it was before he got to the Holy Land, but I forget exactly.
1190, 1188, maybe.
Yeah, he was dead by 1190. So he's actually dead before.
Yeah, before Richard and Philip got there.
Yeah, Barbarossa is one of the, you know, big what ifs, and I mean one of the biggest. You know, on what if he had lived?
Yeah. Every time I hear that whistling from Gino, I just feel like there's like a
I know
an anvil that's gonna come down.
I keep having to hit mute on Gino. I'm really sorry, man. I keep having to hit mute on your feed, but it's like every time we have you on, there's this whistling noise, and so I don't know. I'm kind of having to, once we start bringing people in here, you kind of have to be a little bit relentless about making sure that a bunch of noise doesn't start, because. Anyway, okay, so that's some remarks from Troy there. So it looks like Chris is Chris. Are you talking to us, man? Chris,
we can see him.
Yeah,
I can see him.
Yeah, I'm seeing Chris, but I'm not hearing anything from Chris.
I don't know if he can hear us.
Is this the famous? Is this Chris Torres? Actually,
no, I don't think so. He looks too white.
Chris's eyes.
Also, yeah, where are the lazer eyes?
Yeah.
I don't see the lightsaber.
Where are yours tonight, Stephen?
Yeah, I do need my laser eyes.
You do. You need to get that.
Is that Levi who was making all those?
Yeah, he did one for me today.
Oh, good.
Oh, we need to get Levi on here too at some point.
We do. Yeah. Where is
Levi and Chris?
Levi the pleb.
I'm gonna message Levi, see if he's on here. Levi.
He's gonna be like, no, I'm going on a hike here in Portland.
Or he needs to defend Nexustan or whatever, you know.
So Chris says he can hear us. Well, sorry, man, we can't hear you. You must have something going on with your mic, but anyway, let us know if you get that corrected. But okay, so Troy, so do you have any other comments, Troy, that you'd like to add?
Yeah, well, there's a few things on the chat, but yeah.
Where are you from, man?
Oh, I live in Florida.
Oh, okay, that's a nice place.
Yeah, it's definitely nice. But trying to think of something to the Crusades. Something you guys haven't really talked about. Yeah, well, you hadn't really talked. You actually asked the question once, but maybe we can talk about it again. Is sort of the, I guess, the relationship of the Eastern Christians with the Latin Christians, you know, coming on crusade. Like what exactly theirs was, because I had read that, you know, it wasn't, especially, you know, after they took over and, you know, set up Outrunner and had it, and they were actually ruling the place. The relations kind of got strained, especially over time, because of, I guess, religious differences and whatnot. I don't know if you guys had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about that is, I would say the relationship between the Byzantines and the Crusaders was actually pretty good for a lot of the history, for the Kingdom of Jerusalem especially. I mean, okay, emperors like Manuel Comnenus, for example. So he's the emperor who dies in 1180. But up until then, you know, he actually is the overlord of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Like Baldwin III of Jerusalem, Amalric of Jerusalem, these kings, they pledge fealty to him as a feudal lord, basically. And there's a lot of interaction, there's a lot of positive interaction. In fact, Manuel does a lot to actually protect the Crusader states from really being seriously threatened by the Muslims. But it's once Manuel dies in 1180, and then you get the Angeloi come to power. This no longer the Comnenoi. You know, Manuel was the last, essentially the last of the Comneni emperors. Once the Angeloi come to power, they are explicitly anti-Latin. They are kind of an anti-Latin faction. And I wish Genu could talk here, because he'd have some good stuff to say about this. And they have this explicit anti-Latin policy, and that's really where, I think that's where, you know, there was always kind of some tensions, but, you know, honestly, throughout the period of the Comnenoi, except for the relationship between Antioch and the Byzantine Empire, which at first that's strained, but then Antioch essentially becomes a protectorate of the Byzantines. But, you know, for a lot of the history, I mean, the Kingdom of Jerusalem it's a protectorate of the Byzantines, and there's effectively good relations. So I don't know. I think it really it's late when you really get the serious tensions, in my opinion. But what do you guys think? Like, what do you think, Scott?
Well, we're almost at the end of the story in 1180.
Yeah.
You know, this is the last act.
Yeah, I think that you know, the Angeloi were the ones who, it was under them that you have that whole massacre of the Latins thing.
Yeah,
and they actually make an alliance with Saladin.
Yeah.
And that is just a dramatic. So, and that's another thing that's interesting about Baldwin IV. He has to deal with a situation in which he does not have the protection and the sponsorship of the Byzantines, like his father did or like his uncle did. At that point, the Crusader states are totally isolated, basically, except for whatever aid they can get from the West. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of a testament to his dogged abilities as a ruler that he's able to.
Oh, well, you know, you all were talking about favorite figures from Baldwin IV is among my top. You know, he was one of the greatest.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely, yeah.
Beat Saladin at Montesquieu.
Yeah,
I mean, and again, I think we kind of talk about, like, you know, achievements, you know, kind of actual conquests and stuff like that versus what someone was able to achieve with the resources they have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Baldwin IV, there are several campaigns against Saladin where he doesn't end up with like a massive military victory, but he does prevent Saladin from gaining anything. He stops Saladin from invading the kingdom, and that in itself is just amazing, considering
he was a great leader.
He was, yeah.
I mean, despite, you know, everything he had to deal with, he was just an incredibly great leader.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's kind of getting late. Should we call it a night, guys?
Yeah, I do need to get back to my studies.
Yeah. Well, this has been fun. I'm glad we were able to finally get some people on here to talk to us, some people from the chat and everything. So yeah, I'm going to say thanks to first of all, thanks Rand, Scott, and Peter. Appreciate you guys. And also, I just want to say thanks to
absolutely.
Yeah. Also, I just want to say thanks to everybody who jumped in here: Stephen, Troy, Ginu, and then of course Chris, who we weren't able to actually talk to, unfortunately. But thanks for being here, guys. Troy, you're still unmuted, so thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, everybody, and hey, Chris, looks like Chris is back. We're actually about to call it a night, Chris.
Yeah, I had to do it on my phone. I don't know, my speaker was not working.
Cool. Well, next time we do this, man, jump in and we'll move you to the head of the line. So
that's figured out now. At least I know. So
cool. Thanks for joining us tonight. Well, I guess I'm just gonna send everybody off with a good old fashioned Deus Vult.
Stephen?
Yes, sir.
You got a few minutes after we sign off, or you got stuff to do?
I do, probably just a bit here, but let me go ahead and I'm going to stop our little broadcast here. Bam.